was for him clown argument, not theory. And so he criticized private enterprise, and he proposed, and so his followers thought that the government should take over, and in the name of all the people, administer productive property, land, factories, stores, offices. And the second great thing that this socialist tradition developed was the idea not to allow markets to make decisions. We don't decide what to produce, where to produce, and so on, according to what works in the market. That panders to whoever has the power to buy things in a market, and if that's unequal, then a market is going to unequally distribute. So instead of markets, we should have rational government planning of the economy. We distribute according to what people need and what we want in the society to develop, rather than what makes a profit in a market transaction. Now, if you think about it, both of these key ideas, socialize the private property and make a transition from markets to planning. These were the ideas that inspired the Soviet Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, and many others, insofar as the economic issue was contained. It was an extraordinarily powerful movement. It achieved political power in the biggest country by geography on earth, Russia, and the biggest country by population on earth, China. No mean achievement. It spread like wildfire. This kind of thinking now exists and has existed in every country on the earth. I mean, it rivals the spread of Christianity or the Islam or anything else in the speed and power of its growth. It built massive movements, massive institutions, journals, newspapers, trade unions, everything. But it is now in an extraordinarily demoralized, dispersed, and weak state, this Marxian tradition. And I think Marx himself, were he here, would support the idea, okay, what was a powerful idea, what built a foundation of a movement in the 19th and 20th century, is in trouble at the beginning of the 21st. Not in trouble in the sense that it has nothing to say about capitalism. It remains the greatest repository of criticism. Nothing comes close to that. But capitalism has changed, and it has to change also. And there were serious problems in the societies that were established, like Russia, China, and so on, around socializing property and planning, because other things happened there that make those rather poor models for what the next generation of critics of capitalism are likely to get excited about. So now you get where I'm coming from. I need, as part of that tradition, to supplement, to offer something new and different as part of the criticism of capitalism, as part of the idea of what an alternative could and should be. And my idea is, and the group out of which I come, it's not just me, is that the old idea was very macro, very big. Change the property, change the distribution system from market to planning. We lacked, as a socialist movement, something that was revolutionary and transformative in the daily, immediate life of everybody, of every working person. The thing most of us do, most of our adult life, is work. 5 out of the 7 days, 9 to 5, we prepare for it, we go to work. If the revolution does not transform that experience in the most fundamental way, then it does not mean and will not mean what it needs to mean to get mass support, without which we will not have a serious criticism of capitalism in practical politics. So the idea is to supplement the big picture, socialized property and planning, with a focus on the transformation of the workplace, so that you no longer think of yourself as a worker when other people make the decisions what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. That the new definition of work that a revolution brings is that you will have 2 job descriptions. 1, your particular task, and 2, your necessary participation in all the decisions of what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. Or to say the same thing in another way, that the workers must become, collectively, their own board of directors. Not a board of directors selected by shareholders, no shareholders. That the enterprise will be, and all of us will be as much workers as managers, board directors, designers in charge. And if I had the time, I would explain to you, not only does that overcome the division between manual and mental labor, between drudge work and design, control and function. But it also overcomes educated, uneducated skill, because everything has to change to make such a thing possible. If I had time, I'd also give you, as an impassioned a lecture as I know how, about why we will never have a real political democracy, where people actually care and acquaint themselves with what they have to know to participate in running their communities. And the reason we'll never have it is because we don't do that in the thing we spend most of our life at, workplace. In the workplace, we are told what to do, how to do, when to do. We don't have any say at all. It accustoms us to accepting the same shit where we live. Of course, people they don't have the skills, they don't have the incentive, they don't have the experience, none of it, to run their lives in the community, because we don't allow it in the workplace. If you want to have real participation off the job, you got to give it to people on the job. So each becomes training for a democratic participation in the other. We haven't done that, and we keep wondering why people don't give a shit, don't bother to vote, don't bother to learn about it, haven't the time, haven't the interest, who can give you the detailed information about how every player on some baseball team has hit for the last 20 years, but can't tell you who the name of the local councilman is, whose impact on their lives is 50 times greater than anything that happens on the ball field. Right? What is that? What is that? That's a crazy society that keeps wondering how to have democracy, when the answer is we never allowed economic democracy. That's all I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for economic democracy. So, does Mondragon, for those of you not familiar, Mondragon is an experiment started about 50 some odd years ago by a priest in northern Spain, in the area of Spain just below the Pyrenees Mountains, Basque area. Arizmendi was his name, Father Arizmendi. And he, in an area of desperate long-term unemployment, if you know the political situation in Spain, these are a special group of people. They're perpetually at war with the Spanish government and all the rest. And they had terrible unemployment. And he started self-employment, workers forming what we in this country would have probably called co-ops, but collective workers who did roughly what I'm describing. And here we are 50 years later. There are now roughly 100,000 workers in northern Spain who are in the Mondragon thing, which is now spread to dozens or maybe even hundreds of enterprises, working more or less in this way. I use the words more or less advisedly because it's not exactly what I've described, but it's getting there. But it's an interesting example of an experiment in a radical different thing that has been extremely successful, extremely popular. Nobody dares mess with them. The Spanish government long ago lets them do basically whatever they want. They're big enough now to control the political life in those areas, as well as the economic foundation. They now produce for buyers all over Europe. They could export. They don't just produce locally. So it's very interesting. And not the least of it is, it's an alternative way of understanding what a radical, Arizmendi was a radical worker priest, part of that wing of the Catholic Church, leftist, very influenced by Marx and by the anarchist tradition also in Spain, which is strong in that country. But his idea was, this is an alternative. We don't want to be a labor union. We don't want to bargain with the employer for better conditions. We want to get rid of the employer. It's a little bit like this struggle against slavery in the United States. Remember? 19th century. There were two kinds of people who didn't like slavery. Two kinds of people. One kind who said it's terrible how the slaves are getting treated down there in the South. They should be better fed, they should be better clothed, they shouldn't be torn apart from their families. And then there were other people who said, what the hell are you talking about? The problem isn't that the slave should be in a better condition. The problem is he's a slave. You got to get rid of slavery. That's always been my definition of what a revolutionary capitalism is. Our job is not to get workers higher wages or better benefits. The problem is they're proletarians. They should be in charge. What is this? Improving the condition of the oppressed? No, you get rid of their oppression, which is the only guarantee that those conditions will not go back to the awfulness they were last month or last year. Here's an interesting thing, and one of the few hopeful things I can point to you at. One of the largest unions in the United States, the United Steelworkers of America, still a large union in this country, made an amazing statement last year. It announced, only union in this country to do that, it announced a formal alliance between itself and the Mondragon communities. And the head of the Steelworkers Union, somebody help me remember?
Gerard,
made an amazing statement. He said, you know, given where, I didn't use these words, but this is the substance. Given where capitalism is in the United States, and given where the labor movement is, we can no longer have just one strategy, namely fighting for better conditions for workers, better wages, better benefits, all that. We have to operate on two tracks. Yes, we will fight for better conditions for workers, but we are also interested in beginning a movement in the United States using an alliance with Mondragon so that a program for both unemployed workers and new people entering the labor force, that we will have something as a movement to offer them that's radically different from the employer-employee relationship, another way to think about their job lives, their careers, their futures. That was an amazing thing for an American union to admit. And I wish I could tell you all kinds of things have happened since that statement was released. They haven't, or at least I'm not aware of them. But I don't dismiss this as a remarkable recognition here in the United States that a whole new way of thinking about what a left and what an active labor movement is going to do. But if I were talking to people who were active in leftist organizations, which I know some of you are, then I would say something like this, a dramatic new image, that working people would begin to understand a revolutionary process as being something that's going to radically alter their work lives, those of their husbands, their wives, their children, in a new way that is exciting and gives them a hope for a new life. We have to do that because the old image of a socialized property and planning, for a whole host of reasons, is not going to be able to inspire and motivate the next generation. We see it. It's not sufficient. It may be necessary, but it is not sufficient. And this is one way to conceptualize an image that comes out of the Marxian tradition. And let me stress to you that it does. Because what I'm saying could be re-articulated as follows for those of you that are familiar. The name of the game is to change production so that the people who produce the surplus are the ones who receive it and distribute it. No longer the capitalist arrangement in which one group of people produce the surplus and a different group of people get it. In that split, you have in the core of your production system opposition, contradiction, and conflict. You see it sometimes when the workers walk out and carry picket signs. You see it quietly in sabotage. But it's always there, and it always shapes what goes on. The overcoming of that contradiction is what I'm talking about. And that is achieved if the people who produce the surplus are the same people who get it and who distribute it and who decide how to shape society with it. We now have the mass of us producing surplus that a tiny minority gets and distributes and shapes society to keep them in that position. And we're in the peculiar place of kind of not wanting to face it because it makes us what we are. And that's sometimes hard to face. Sir?
Is this perspective also the reason why you talked about corporations and rich people, poor people, and not, for instance, about ideas like the Tobin tax, to give it an international dimension of the tax issue? Like we had, this political force called attack, which was a bit silent in the last crisis, from my perspective. But did you deliberately not focus on that because it's about taxing finance and not bringing it down to this perspective?
Yes. Okay. If I had more time, if we had a fuller conversation, sure. But I come from a tradition in which singling out one part of the capitalist system as the target for our anger is a tactical, strategic, and theoretical mistake.